What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to TOJ Talks. I'm your host, Will Parkinson, at WillPod11 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. TOJ Pod, Ball 32, the whole 9 yards. Saturday morning here. College football is officially back. We are almost into the NFL season. We're, I guess, 6, 7 days away here. Stuff going on in Brazil, games everywhere all over the country. No better person to have on. Usually 2 or 3 times a year, Rich Samini hops on with us. And Rich, how we doing today? Going to enjoy like the last weekend of freedom before we get rolling here?
Good to be with you, Will. I always appreciate coming on. No, not really. This is for football writers. This is actually a busy weekend. So the players and coaches are relaxing, but I know I'm working on a couple of stories that I have deadlines on. So it's a little busy.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it might be one of the last, one of the last nice weekends, the long weekend, the whole 9 yards. I'm
Yeah.
going to touch on a couple of different things here. I want to kind of just get your impressions of kind of how camp finished out. I know there was a lot of Jets and Giants talk, and I don't know how you feel, but I still feel like truly that they should be playing every year in the regular season. I just think it'd be really good for the market and the fan bases and whatnot. But I felt like there was a lot of excitement from the Jet side of things, and there was a lot of excuses and weird stuff from the Giants side of things. Like there was talked about like for days and days and days on after that practice. How did you feel like camp finished up overall? For the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest positive was the fact that they didn't suffer any significant injuries, and to me, and I've been doing this a long time. Forget about how everyone played and who looked good and who looked bad. The most important thing is coming out of it with your team intact, and the Jets did that. Now they did have some minor stuff like Yaboa and Lecky Fotu are on IR, but those are not major injuries. All the key pieces came out of it okay. That's number one. Whether the decision not to play any of the starters in the preseason was a good one or not, time will tell. I think there'll be some rust going into the first game. Nothing replaces actual game action. So I think they're looking at some rust. But in Robert Sala's view, the risk outweighed the reward of not, with the whole starter playing thing. So I thought it was a really good preseason for the Jets. The only negative was the Hassan Reddick thing lasting the entire time. So that was like the black cloud over it. But from a Jet perspective, the team looks to be in good shape.
Yeah, and I know we've talked a lot about Rodgers, and rightfully so. Obviously, he's always going to be the number one topic of conversation. All franchise quarterbacks are, all these stars are. You obviously have seen him now the last 2 years up close and personal over I guess about 30, 35 practices or so, and obviously the preseason games. So OTAs, all that different stuff. We talked a little bit last summer, and you mentioned, I think on this pod, the one concern you have is just a little bit of from a mobility perspective. The arm still looks good, mobility wise, maybe like I don't know the percentage of drop off. I don't want to misquote you and put you in a bad spot, but it was like something like, hey, people were just a little concerned about the movement. How'd you feel like he comparatively maybe to last summer? I was only obviously at 5 or 6 practices, but I felt like he was like doing a lot of stuff that looked very vintage Rodgers ish this summer. Again, it's practice, but you took in pretty much every single practice. How did you feel about how he compared from last summer to this summer?
Well, I thought he got better as this summer went along. I think early on, you looked at the mobility, maybe wasn't quite back to where it was. I think he was sort of feeling his way coming off the injury. And then by the end, I thought he looked really good. I think the arm has been there the entire time. I think Aaron Rodgers is one of those guys who could be 55 years old and roll out of bed and still throw a 40-yard spiral. So that part, I mean, I went back and watched some of the video clips from the Giants joint practice. I mean, he was incredible. I talked to someone from the Giants who said, and I don't want to use a curse word here, but I'll just say, I asked him about Rodgers. He said he looked effing good. And he did look effing good. And but the mobility, like I talked to recently, Warren Moon, Hall of Fame quarterback, and Vinny Testaverde, both played after the age of 40, and they said the thing that you don't know until the actual real games is the reaction time. And so that's going to be something we won't know until he gets out there against San Francisco.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think I kind of was in favor as the summer went along of not playing the starters. I just felt like the 3 joint practices, which I don't know, I mean, it's as many joint practices as anybody in the league. And it felt like, I talked a lot about this. I felt like the intensity of camp was a lot more than I've seen in previous years with the Jets. I just feel like we've seen a lot of like injury prevention in camp, and then week one happens and boom, 2 hamstrings, 2 Achilles. It was like year after year. I felt like the same thing. I have no idea what will happen this year. I don't think any of us do, but I know they hit a lot more this summer. And I feel like there was, we talked, I think the inter squad scrimmage, we were talking like they ran like a copious amount of play. I mean, it was insane the amount of plays. I don't remember a Jets camp in the under Robert Saleh, at least, that was as like high rep intense. Did you get the same feeling? I know they talked a lot about that, and you've talked some about that as well.
Yeah, I mean they ran about 800 plays through camp for the starters, and so that was an uptick of about 30% from last year. So I mean, there's obviously very specific restrictions from the CBA on how long you can spend on the field, but teams can do what they want with during that allotted time. And the Jets went really high rep. I think Robert Saleh knew all along that he wasn't going to play Aaron Rodgers in the preseason game, so he would design a plan to say, okay, we're going to work him in the practices. And so I thought it was a really interesting old school approach. I mean, load management is such a popular phrase in sports now, and Saleh really went to an old school type of approach. Let's go with volume. Let's work this guys. The word callous was thrown around a lot this summer, and players to a man, from Rodgers to Quincy Williams, every player, CJ Mosley said this was easily the most taxing training camp they've had under Saleh. And Quincy Williams said it reminded him of his college days at Murray State, when they were freshmen getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, I don't think the Jets did that, but the point is it was a very taxing training camp that they hope pays dividends in the regular season.
I was going to say, I mean, I don't mean this in a negative way. You've seen a lot of every Jets coach that most of, in the modern, in the 90s, 90s and on. And I think you've talked a lot about Parcells, and I think people get lost, the GM Parcells and the coach and all that stuff. But his camps, from everything I remember being as a kid, going to training camp, was like, again, it's very different. They can't do 2 and 3 days, and they can't be in full pads every day. But part of why I think those teams were so good outside of the talent was they were extremely physical and they were in better shape than everybody. And like, did you get that kind of sense of, as you mentioned, old school there, where, hey, week one, it seems like the NFL today, week 1 through 4, are almost teams ramping up. And it feels like maybe the Jets are trying to go into week 1 like as fully ready as you can be from a physicality standpoint. Do you think that's part of the strategy, or is it just an injury prevention situation?
No, I think it's a lot of factors. I mean, when Parcells did it, it was a different era. It was 2-a-days, and so that was a completely different dynamic. But I even remember under Herm Edwards, those were 2-a-days also. And I remember Kevin Mawai saying once, man, this was the easiest training camp, we've ever had. This was like a country club, compared to some other training camps. And so every coach has a different philosophy. I do think there is something to the fact that the first 4 games of the regular season, there is a feeling out process, and it is almost, and I hate to say it's an extended preseason because that's not. These games count, obviously, and they're very important. But there is that kind of feel. And even Bill Belichick, I saw him talking on the McAfee show the other day. He made reference to how you really don't know your team for those first 4 games. You're learning a lot about your team. And so I'm sure that's going to be the case for the Jets as they go through this. I mean, they think they know what they have, but you really don't know for sure. And I think the Jets will unveil some wrinkles that they'll work through this year, especially on offense and maybe even on defense, that that the fans haven't seen yet. So it is a like the first month is definitely when teams find their identity.
Yeah, no, 100%. In terms of Salah, I was just kind of curious, where you're at with him, because I feel like if you're not as high on the Jets, I think some people are really high and think they could go win a title. Some people are skeptical. I think Rodgers obviously is the number one. Him and kind of the Tyron Smith, Rodgers, Mike Williams guys that didn't play for them last year, obviously all big additions in their own rights, all coming off of injuries or guys that have gotten hurt in the last couple of years. Salah's kind of the one where, like, if you believe in the Jets, you feel like, hey, he's never had the quarterback. He's had, reasonable excuse to not have been a playoff coach yet. and look what they've done with the defense, how they've developed guys, the defensive staff, all that. And then if you're kind of a, hey, I'm not so high on the Jets, you're like, comparatively in the division or even in the conference, where does he rank among coaches? Do you trust him in a big spot? We've never really seen it.
Right.
Where do you kind of sit on where Salah's at the moment? Do you feel like it's right to say, hey, the defense has been awesome and he's a large part of that, and now he's Aaron Rodgers? Or are you kind of in the, I don't know, man, like they go to Pittsburgh or they go to Cincinnati or they go to Baltimore? Do you really trust Salah out coaching one of these guys?
It's a fair question, and it's hard to believe I'm going to say this, but I mean, here we are after 3 years, and I'm not sure we know how good a coach Robert Saleh is. I mean, 18-33 obviously is not a great record. It's actually the fourth worst in Jet history among their full-time head coaches, and the bottom three guys are the kind of, you don't want to be linked with any of those three guys. So I'll leave the names out. I think the fans can figure it out for themselves. But you mentioned the quarterback. He has not had a good quarterback situation. He has not even had a mediocre quarterback situation. It's been bad. I mean, statistically, factually bad. The Jets are 32nd in QBR over the last 3 years, and it's been horrendous. So I have actually a solid feature that will be published on Monday. Getting into all of this stuff and what he learned from last year. And one of the little nuggets I came across in my research. We know the Jets offense was terrible last year. They averaged like 16 point something a game. So if you go back to 2012, there have been 26 teams that averaged less than 17 points a game. And out of those 26 teams, last year's Jets actually had the highest winning percentage. So I think it shows that they were 2/3 of a team and that it's not a lost cause. And so I think Saleh is extremely confident. I think he reinvented himself a little bit this offseason in terms of his approach. And it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
I was going to say, I think, obviously there's a large amount of factors. I think, guys that are under pressure, and obviously a lot of some of the stuff that kind of came out in the February timeframe and all that stuff was Saleh. Like, he seemed like a different guy during camp. Even answering questions, he was a little bit more reserved, didn't kind of put his foot in his mouth a little bit. I think something he's struggled with in years past. I know there's a lot of decisions that are group decisions, and it's not always him. And the Zach stuff always was the conversation. But I felt like even with the Reddick stuff, he's handled it much better than he's handled some of these other things in the past. We kind of just like didn't say anything. And, even he got better from OTAs to camp where it's like, it's not a question for me. He's not here. When he's here, we'll welcome him, et cetera. Obviously 53-man rosters, things will move, right? When Reddick reports eventually, someone will obviously have to go to the practice squad or be released. Overall, was there any surprises to you? Did you feel like, obviously, again, the UDFAs, was a really cool story, and I don't think it was fully a surprise most of them made it. I think maybe it was a surprise all three of the defensive linemen made it, and then Tack, I guess, is a fourth kind of guy there. But I didn't feel like there was too many surprises. Maybe keeping two tight ends and they cut Brownlee and then bring him back. Like, I didn't feel like this roster was pretty solidified 6 weeks ago. It was like 5 or 6 guys that had a chance to make the team.
Yeah, in fact, our beat writer roster pool reflected that, because usually, you have the winner. There'll be because we submit our entries before the first preseason game, so it's really hard to project.
Oh, hell yeah!
And it's, like before kickoff, the night of the first preseason game, or in this case, it was a day game. But so like the guys, we have a 4-way tie for first place right now because it's based on the opening day roster, and the 4 guys who are in the tie for the lead only missed 1 guy, which shows you that there weren't a whole lot of competitive situations. Of course, we all had Yeboah and Fotu on our roster, and we didn't know they'd get hurt and they would go on IR. But I think the defensive line is the one area that was the wild card just because of the Reddick situation. FYI, all of us in the roster pool do have Reddick on our opening night roster, so we'll see if that comes to fruition. The 3 guys making the roster, the undrafted free agents, those are good stories. We've seen the Jets find guys like Bryce Huff, and even going back further, Snacks Harrison, was a great find for the Jets back, a decade or so ago, probably longer. But, it also shows that their defensive line isn't as deep as it once was. The fact that you're taking on three undrafted guys. So it's like a double-edged story. And I think Tack will be involved. That was a surprise. I mean, I don't think any of us really gave it a thought when they signed Tack, back in before training camp. It was like a, reclamation project, Ulbrich tossing a bone to one of his former players. But the guy really came in and he performed well. And I think he's got a chance to be in the rotation against the 49ers, as one of the pass rushing guys. So other than that, I didn't think there were really any surprises. Just it kind of played out the way we thought. Now, Malachi Corley, I don't think I think fans maybe had bigger expectations for him. I don't see him as being a guy who's going to get a lot of playing time early in the year. So maybe that's a surprise in the opposite direction. But other than that, I think it went pretty much according to the way we expected.
Yeah, I was going to